the biggest issue is access.
Mm,
And from that, everything, like there's so many ramifications. When you don't have access to a medical healthcare provider who's able to understand what your needs are, you're not going to have
mm,
somebody addressing those. And
yeah.
healthcare access also entails somebody who has like cultural humility,
Mm,
somebody that is open to conversations, and also I think somebody that needs to see the power structure in the healthcare system with a different set of eyes, because what we have right now, it's completely proven it's not working for not only Latinas but minorities in general.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of I Have Something to Say, where subject matter experts are unafraid and unapologetic about sharing their perspectives regarding issues that impact our lives. They speak up because basically they give a shit. So if you're tired of canned answers and want to finally hear real people cut through the BS and talk about real issues, this is the podcast for you. I'm your host, Sami Heyman Marrero from Urbander, and behind our mixer is our producer, Chris Majoka from UdoU.
Welcome, everyone, to this episode of I Have Something to Say. And today we're going to talk about a very important topic, but from a very unique lens, because we're really talking about health disparities, health literacy, health equity, and the US healthcare system, right? And how you approach all that from the lens of Latina or Latine, right? Pediatrician. And so today I invited my new friend, Dr. Edith Nieves López. We become friendly. We're following each other on LinkedIn, and I feel like she's a sister from another mister because there's a lot of the content that she publishes that really resonates with me. And I want to thank you, Dr. Nieves, for joining us today, because I just feel that you you really exemplify, to me anyway, what it really means to be an advocate for the community, and really, pushing back to systems that don't quite fit, right? This new global majority, really, right? That we're having now, in this country, and the experiences, the lived experiences of communities that are non-white, and perhaps also migrant, part of la diaspora, and that don't quite understand how to navigate the US healthcare system. And number two, that it kind of doesn't really serve them too well in many instances, right? But we'll get right to it. Again, thank you for joining us today. And I just wanted to start off by asking you, why did you decide to practice, pediatrics? Tell me a little bit about your background, and where you're based out of, and what's drawn you, right, to medicine.
So I think whenever we speak of ourselves, we always go to the beginning, which is our family. I was born and raised in Puerto Rico. I trained in medicine in Centro Médico in San Juan, which is the biggest medical center in the island, the main referral center. And then I moved to US when I was 29. And I make a point about that piece because my lived experience comes from someone who was in her home country and grew
Mm.
up there, and saw people who looked like her and had, a lot of representation. So I met this American guy who was doing medicine in Puerto Rico. We got engaged, and then I joined him in US when I finished my training. So I've been in mainland US since 2010, so 13 years now. Right now, I am in North Carolina, in the Raleigh area. And how do I end up doing what I'm doing? My dad was a physician,
Mm.
and he was like the town's doctor, el doctor del pueblo. He came from very humble family origins. He was the first one to go, to college, and who he was what shaped who I am today. He was very just engaged in the community. There was no, distance between his patients and himself. Everybody knew his name. He didn't wear like a code reading drive, the car that you would expect a doctor to drive. He reminded me a bit of like the movie Patch Adams. I don't know if you're familiar with that one with like Robin Williams, which is
Yes. Yeah.
so he was that person, which I consider to be the norm. I thought that was the reality of everywhere you went. And then I got out and started, getting to know the world and realized not all doctors were like that. But I did saw him as what things should be. And that's how I ended up being a physician because of I was inspired by his work.
That's fantastic. And then, getting into the specialty of pediatrics, I feel is so brave because you kind of got to know what you're doing, because they half the time children can't tell you exactly what their symptoms are, how they're feeling. And so what compelled you to go into pediatrics?
I've always liked little kids since I was little myself. I would always gravitate to be like a caregiver to other kids, and I'm the oldest in my household. So you get into this role that your family kind of puts you in when you're the oldest. And, in the Latina culture too, we are like the responsible ones. So
Hmm.
I think I had this like motherly instincts. And then kids, I know people find them challenging. I find them so inspiring and so authentic. And even though they can tell you that they're sick or their symptoms, you can see through them.
Mm.
A child that doesn't feel good, you can tell. And the ones that start like talking, they would let you know right off the bat what bothers them. I also enjoy the relationship with the parents, moms, dads, grandmas, grandpas, Latino families. They know their babies very well. So it's a good combo of like observation of behavior and physical exam, but also the family relationship is essential. And I don't find it challenging. I think because our culture is so much gregarious and we are always sharing, I brought that piece of my childhood and my upbringing into my career, and I don't find it hard. I actually, a lot of people find me very approachable. So I get a lot of information that I don't necessarily ask, but people feel like they can let their guard down. And it is not challenging at all. I really enjoy what I do.
Yeah, and so it's really inspiring to hear you describe, right? How the family dynamics. I have a friend who told me that many moons ago, when the first wave of Puerto Ricans specifically moved to the Northeast, an article came out in the newspaper. I can't remember the article, but I know she sent it to me, and it was of a reporter making observations of Puerto Rican moms doting on their children in a public park, and he was observing how involved they were and how doting they were and how nurturing and just affectionate and touching and holding and guiding and all of this stuff. And he was marveled. It was like a beautiful piece. When I find it, I'm going to share it with you. But it really does describe, right, this very intimate, right, bond and connection that, I mean, all parents love their kids, or you at least would hope so, right?
Mhm.
But there's this in our culture, there is this like extra investment and involvement that transcends, right, what the customary caregiving and nurturing, and right, it's just like this deeper sense of awareness of taking care of your young, right? I don't know if I'm explaining it well, but
Mhm.
yeah. And so you are on the US mainland, you have over a decade of experience, and now you're working in public health in this arena, right? And really working on mitigating health disparities and educating families on how to best navigate the U.S. healthcare system. And so, what are your observations? I know that the topic that we landed on was the effects of a colonialist indoctrination on healthcare systems. And I know that you feel very strongly about breaking all of these. myths about the current system and alternatives and all of that, right? And so, could you share with me, and with us, whoever is listening, your perspectives on this, coming as a grown up doctor already working in another type of system, right? Coming in from that lens.
So I would say, like every physician, we're trained to sort of have this idea of us as an authority, and with a wealth of knowledge, and very just we tell the patient what to do because we know better.
Mhm.
And that is a very old school system, in very Eurocentric, and the patient is almost removed from the process, as they have to just obey what I'm telling them to do. And as I got into healthcare in the US in particular, I started working with underserved population. I noticed the incidence of some diseases and some issues were more prevalent. And I was under the impression, I was prejudiced, as I was told, that people didn't care much for their health, or they were not putting enough effort, they were not invested, or pobre gente, ignorantes. But then it dawned on me that this is, let me be curious about it. What is happening? Why is my patient not able to follow these instructions? Is it because I'm failing, about explaining the disease and the possible outcomes in a way that they
Mhm.
understand?
Mhm.
Is it because the system doesn't allow for them to pick up the medicine at a timely manner? So I start to see things, both accountability from my end, and I start to not just blaming or shifting that responsibility on the patient, which they are responsible for their health, but also what are these factors that may be influencing this lack of access or health improvement? And I became more humble and observant about to people's specific life experiences.
Mhm.
And the more you work with the Latina community, we're not a monolith. There's so much, live experiences from people from even within the same country. Some people may be refugees. Some people may come to work or study here. So I think I start to see the system and challenge the system, because if the patients are not getting the care they need, the system is not working. It's not the patients. I have to look
Right.
up. So I started to look upstream into pretty much everything that I do, and that includes myself. And just to question and with humility, try to truly understand why and not assume. I think I was
Mm.
at the beginning very, like I said, very prejudiced, because you are trained to be almost like a god, like in this system where you know better than anybody. And it's colonialism. You are in a hierarchy where you're above somebody, and they're there to obey. And I start to think of our culture, we're more community driven.
Yeah.
I start seeing our relationship is not as transactional as typically the American system is.
Yeah.
Medicine in US is very much like individualistic, as where Latinos are more community based, and we take care of each other. So I just became more culturally sensitive too, and humble.
Mhm.
Me bajé del caballo que tenía, like I was up here, and I fell, and I'm like, you know what? There's something that is within yourself, and also the system that you were, taught into. This is not working. So I have to be more observant and proactive about what is it that I can do, because it's my responsibility to make sure things are more, accessible for my patients. And education became like one of the first things I believe I became more passionate, which is explain things in arroz y habichuela.
Right.
If my patient understands what they have, which is my job, they are going to be empowered, and they would take matters into their hands, and they may be always, open to tell me limitations. I try to be non-judgmental. So, there's an anecdote from something they did and they didn't want to share with somebody else, but they, ya que estamos hablando, doctora, ya que usted se ve buena gente, le voy a contar,
Yeah, it's like, thank you, doctor, because I feel like you're not gonna throw me under the bus. I feel like I could tell you this one thing where I kind of screwed up, right?
Yeah, and I think compassion goes a long way too. Just being very humble and human and don't assume people don't want to do stuff. Just wonder what is it happening that is not allowing my patient to reach that full wellness potential.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And so I see that you've been in several states, right? So you were in Ohio, you're in North Carolina now. And do you see the Latino population the last 10 years? I mean, we know the census numbers, right? The growth in the population is massive compared to all other ethnic groups combined. But in places like Ohio, North Carolina, what's your take? How do you see it from a healthcare perspective?
So in the Midwest, I was working more in the inner city area, so I didn't see as many Latinx as I see now in this North Carolina, because this is a more agricultural state.
Okay.
So I feel the population here is much bigger, and it's very much like farm, and service industry. In Ohio,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't feel like I didn't see a lot of Latinos as I see them here. Like in my clinic, I 99% of the time I speak Spanish. I have very few English speaker patients,
Okay.
and I am in my own bubble where I feel so honored and happy to just speak. Since I step in my clinic until I leave, it's pure Spanish.
Yeah. That's really
So
great. And so then, have you worked with healthcare systems also? I'm assuming yes. And so then, because I saw on your CV on LinkedIn that there's a part where you said transitioning into work that aligns more with my core values. I'm like, yes, I love that.
yes,
It
yes.
was a
So
short gap. What happened? And I know you don't care. You're gonna share because this is the stuff, right? That sometimes people are feeling bogged down, and the weight is not so much the work; it's more the soul work, right? Yeah. And so then, what happened? If you don't mind me asking.
so I was working in a community clinic, and this was in the middle of the pandemic. I
Mm,
saw a lot of illness, a lot of loss, a lot of trauma in the community, and I did not feel. My impression was that the institution was not aligned with the needs of the patients.
mm,
And I try to convey that information from a physician's perspective, and I try to advocate in like different deficits in the system that were access through the pandemic was critical, and people were
yeah.
not having that access because the system was never set up for them.
Mm,
And the pandemic, just I tell people, it's like this little mirror that you just play with in the sun and just
yeah.
flash it on somebody, and they try to like hide away from you, and you keep like bothering them.
Yeah.
These deficiencies in the system were always there, but the pandemic was like exponentially in your face. You can't deny this is happening. And I became burnout because I try to advocate a lot for my patients, and I was seeing a lot of trauma and death and loss, that I didn't feel what I was doing was going to lead to somewhere where there was going to be change,
And
meaningful
so
change.
what? Yeah. So then you established your own clinic, or did you already have your clinic?
So I transitioned into the health department, public health,
Mhm.
in a
Oh, okay.
different county, and
Mhm.
I'm serving a very similar population, but within the government system.
Nice. Okay, good. And so you feel like you have more autonomy to be able to really address the needs of the community in a very direct way. Talk to me about, what your day-to-day looks like and what type of strategies are you using to help reduce these health disparities and create more health literacy.
So I feel like I have more autonomy. I am able to influence more, but as you know, systems are set up and they don't welcome change.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's always a power structure, there's a system, and there's a hierarchy. And whenever you speak up, that's gonna lead to somebody just say, "Wait a minute, what do you mean? What is like? Is nobody told me about this before?" So there's always this skepticism from the leadership about, "Are you sure this is happening?" Right? and then you document or you bring those subjects or topics with concrete data and present it to them, and then they have to sit down and reflect on it. But the way that I want to do is I ask to give my clinic a system in which my patients can express their experience with our clinic themselves.
Mm.
I don't want to speak up for my patients. I want to be able to have a system that is efficient in which they can express concerns or suggestions directly, where it's documented, and somebody can then follow up on that. I am trying to set up systems where people are empowered. I don't want to be a benefactor. I don't want to speak on behalf of people. I want to be able, if I leave a place, there's a system for them to advocate for themselves. They're very well equipped to do so. We just happen to ignore them when they speak.
Mm.
So this is when I see colonialist systems. I don't want to center myself. I don't want to be their spokesperson. I want them to, within the system, have power to say things, and that their experience is honored and somebody acts on their concerns.
Right. And so do you think that in the continuum of care, right, from point of contact and point of entry to discharge, that that's a big element that's missing? It's really probing and listening and allowing for that self advocacy, assuming that they're either not able or capable, or just because the egos are so big, right? The bobbleheads are so big that it's just a closed offering, or it's a very limited offering.
So typically in most systems that are dealing with underserved population, the leadership is very much disconnected with the reality of the patient.
Mm,
That's my impression. And in leadership positions, you should have people who have lived experiences, because are they're experts on issues that they grew up into. And
yeah.
I feel there's a disconnect between leadership and the patients. Plus, there's this assumption that there's a system in place and it should be working, but they don't inquire with the patient, is this really working for you?
Right.
Um, and whoever makes decisions from the get go is not contemplating, is my patient, is my patient able to read and write?
Mm-hmm.
Does my patient have a cell phone with internet access?
Mm-hmm.
Does my patient have is computer literacy? So a lot of the systems, when we see them and we are privileged, we know how we're computer techie. We grew up, or our work allows for them, like, oh, we have emails. A lot of my patients don't have emails because they don't need emails. So
Mm-hmm.
all these things we assume are part of our normal. The person who's making decisions, because that's the reality, they set up systems with their own normal, but they don't look at what my patients set up in their lives are. So from the get-go, you're setting up inequities. Like I use an example, like for COVID vaccine, a lot of things were online.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, my patients don't know how to fill that application online. The
Mm-hmm.
application is only in English, or there's a Spanish version, and I would read the Spanish version. I was like a secret customer. I would call the phone numbers. Like, I always go through the process as if I was one of my patients.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever there's a service that they say it's working, I would do that myself. And I learned
Yeah.
that, well, my patient says they're calling and they're not getting answers. I don't think they're lying to me. Let me
Mm-hmm.
see myself. So I think a lot of the issues stem from the fact that leadership is not in tune with the needs of the community. And sometimes, and I think actually in a lot of instances, accountability as to the deficits, it's very hard to achieve with the leadership, because very few people want to say something is not working, because then it's a bad reflection on them. That's my experience.
Yeah.
So it's pointing to those deficits is not going to make you the most popular person
I know.
within the leadership.
Yeah, I wonder why. I know.
Hmm.
But so then, how, as an advocate, because I'm sure you've been able to, affect change. I'm sure that in some way, shape, or form, and sometimes se tarda más, otras menos, right? But I'm sure that you, in your role, have, and as assertive and affirming as you are, you've been able to change hearts and minds and processes. Like, how does one navigate that? Because I think that's applicable for any industry or any kind of offering that's done to support the community and edify the community, and reduce disparities. There's value in that, right? So how? Because todo el mundo dice, oh, self advocate, oh, teach people, como es? Don't give people the fish, teach them how to fish. But then how do you do that in a broken system? How would you say you've been able to make things change, poco or mucho, right?
Mhm.
Within a system that's not quite ready, right, to go full on, right, transformation.
I think my role has been a lot about, I personally like share information about how to navigate the system, and that happens with every patient encounter.
Mm,
I read letters. I explain to someone the application process. I am very connected in the community-based organizations, and I even refer patients, and I have personal relationships with people. So I think my approach is, as somebody who's trying to be connected with what's happening with boots on the ground. I'm very grassroots oriented. um,
mm-hmm,
so what I'm trying to do is always trying to find resources and show my patients the pathway to get them. And if there's not a clear
mm,
pathway, let me connect you with someone who can help you, right, within my network,
mm,
or let me pair you with somebody who's done it before. So my approach is community building. That's I think
mm,
that's how we describe it. Because,
mm-hmm.
like you said, I've been able to advocate and make some changes, but in real time, my patients need services. They need things.
Now, exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I
Yeah.
also I do a lot of translating of like resources on my own.
Mm,
I draft documents and I do letters for like school requirements, for like assessments for special education. I have my own template. So I create a lot of content myself.
yeah.
I in the clinic there was a lot of resources, but they were not in Spanish. So I teamed with one of my medical assistants and we made it available. I would always point out like language access. There's a lot
Yeah.
of resources, but there's not a language, availability for my patients. So let's find those, entry points where they would be able to access themselves so they can connect and start navigating the system. in
Yeah.
my in my industry, I think a lot of it's language justice for the most part,
Wow.
and interpreter services are usually very limited, sadly.
Yeah.
So it takes a lot of engagement to connect yourself with the right people and get your name out there. I think at this point I'm pretty known as somebody who's tiene grita, es una peleona. So
Yeah.
like people are they're not, they're like, well, when Edith talks, we just better start doing something because she's loud and she makes a lot of noise. So I
Right.
think
Right.
at this point with like admin people, it's more about like, let's do something so she just kind of stops talking. But with
Yeah.
patients, it's just connecting them with things and making sure that they also speak for themselves. And like I tell them, like for school stuff, you can appeal a decision from the school. There's so many things that they don't know. So
Yeah.
I've educated myself how things work, so I can
Mm-hmm.
explain to them and they can do it themselves. So I feel like I learned to navigate the system myself in order to be able to guide them through the like how to do it.
Right. So I love that, right? It's like you put themselves in your patient's shoes, see what their lived experiences are, right? And then with that you're better informed, to help them, to fill in the gaps and say, mira, go this way, do that over there, they can help you, or whatever it is. But then also you're better informed to then communicate that, or gritarle, right, or yell and
Yeah.
shout, in the mountain shop and mountaintops, I'm sorry, about, hey people, this is what's happening, right? You're not seeing it because you're up here, and we really need you to understand that this is the reality on the ground. So that there's a lot of real value and power in that, to be able to. So you're almost like you're a disparities translator. Talk about language justice, right? Yeah, absolutely. And so where do you see, you going, right? And I know that's a lot to ask, but I know, for example, a lot of physicians, and they just happen to be Latino physicians here in Central Florida, are stepping away from working with the big, hospital networks and creating their own, uh, how do you say, conglomerates or practices, right? Like they're teaming up and saying, no, ya no, this is how we want to do it, right? And I know several that already, right? That I've spoken to, and they're like, I'm like, why did you decide to start your own practice, or why are you teaming up with all of these other doctors, right? And some of them are in the same fields, right? And the answer I've gotten has been, well, because of the ability to be able to really help our patients and spend more time with them and get to know them, and and do even house calls and stuff like that. It's so in your mind's eye, what is like an ideal, doctor patient relationship, in the community, and what does that look like?
It's funny that you talk about it because I think I'm in this particular time in my life reassessing priorities and how I see myself. And it's funny because in medicine, you have a just very, you can predict your pathway. Everything is set up for you. It's like step A to Z. And then you get into the field and you realize that, well, things are not as straightforward as you thought they're going to be because you
Yeah.
were trained to just do and follow. And then when you get into the system, you're like, wait a second, this doesn't seem to be working or align or as I thought I was going to be able to operate with more autonomy, like you said. So I'm considering and reassessing where do I want to be and where are my skill set the most useful and where my skill set is going to be the most impactful. So right now I'm considering where do I go from here. I would like to have more freedom and more agency to devote my energy where I think it's a priority for my community. I am trying to figure that out right now. I have no idea. I don't know what I want to do when I'm a grown up. um, because these type of things are not straightforward. You evolve in your career, and again, nobody tells you these things. And also, you have your family priorities. So I'm trying to
Mhm.
find a niche. I love mental health, and I also love advocacy. So I'm trying to create my own position as a more
Mhm.
independent physician where I'm able to do both advocacy with more freedom and also address mental health inequities. I will let you know how that looks when I figure it out.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. But it's good that, just to know, right, what that thought process is, based on your experience, right? Of working somewhere else as an adult and then coming here and spending, a decade over here working, over here navigating that, and then working for, clinics and private institutions, but then also now with the government sector. So you have a pretty well-rounded view and also assessment, because I feel like that's what you've been doing throughout, right? Assessing esto funciona, how is this working out, right? What works, what doesn't, what can be completely changed and redone. But I love that at the center, of everything that you're working on and evaluating, even for yourself, it's the community and the patients that you want to make sure that you help improve their health outcomes. And so, what would you say are the top, um, social determinants of health for specifically the Latina community, because it's the one that you're mostly right focused on right now? So, what would you say? Just because I mean they fluctuate in order. I don't think they've changed much sadly, right?
Yeah.
Sadly, in you know, in the past 4 decades, I'm sorry. But
Mhm.
you know, so what would you say, like, right now, would that be, or would those be?
I would say that the biggest issue is access.
Mm,
And from that, everything, like, there's so many ramifications. When you don't have access to a medical healthcare provider who's able to understand what your needs are, you're not going to have
mm,
somebody addressing those. And
yeah.
healthcare access also entails somebody who has like cultural humility,
Mm,
somebody that is open to conversations, and also I think somebody that needs to see the power structure in the healthcare system with a different set of eyes, because what we have right now, it's completely proven it's not working for not only Latinas but minorities in general.
mm-hmm.
So I try to think of, let's not place this burden on the patients. Let's, how can I make little fractures in this
Mm,
system so there's like they can heal in a different way, so we can mold it a little bit. So trying to be more strategic about where do I put my effort that is going to yield the most return.
I love that. I love that comparison or that analogy with, breaking something so it could heal and repair itself almost, right? Into a better version of itself. Yeah. And so, I mean, there's a lot of work to be done in this space. I really look forward to seeing your career soar and what you're planning to do next, because your sense of purpose is very, very palpable in everything you post. And I just wanted to let you know that I appreciate you, right? To have such a strong voice in our community that is not only advocating for but teaching people. You're modeling behavior on how people should self-advocate, and I'm sure that you've seen it also in your patients. You've probably seen how people have been, like you mentioned before, empowered, or have gained these skills of speaking up and really addressing their own needs and speaking about what, doing that ask. It's like,
Mhm.
yo necesito ayuda con, like, I need help with, right? Addressing all of these disparities. That's great. Well, again, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been very, very insightful, and I hope we can have you back again soon.
We'd love to come back.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of I Have Something to Say, where subject matter experts are unafraid and unapologetic about sharing their perspectives regarding issues that impact our lives. They speak up because basically they give a shit. So if you're tired of canned answers and want to finally hear real people cut through the BS and talk about real issues, this is the podcast for you. I'm your host, Sami Jimen Marrero from Urbander, and behind our mixer is our producer, Chris Majoka from UdoU.